Chapter 491, The Sherlock Moriarty in the Investigation Report. Leonard? Klein thought for a moment that he was mistaken. However, the blurring caused by the rays of light wasn't that serious. Being familiar with Leonard, he was able to quickly confirm his previous judgment. In the time it took to take a breath, Leonard disappeared, the light dispersed, and the valley returned to its midwinter silence. The scene which Klein saw in the dream shattered as a result. He opened his eyes and placed the badge he had obtained from Lenivis on the surface of the long bronze table. Is it really Leonard, or a faceless disguised as Leonard? Klein considered and flipped a gold coin. His spirituality had told him through the medium that it was Leonard Mitchell, his teammate from the Tingen Nighthawks team.
Is he the investigator sent by the Church of the Goddess for the gathering, or is he risking his life to find an opportunity to find the revenge target while keeping the Nighthawks in the dark?
Klein muttered to himself in suspicion. It was hard to make an accurate judgment. And without any leads, his divination couldn't provide him with any revelations. After a few seconds of silence, Klein gave a self-deprecating smile as he drew a crimson moon on his chest.
I wish him the best of luck. May the goddess watch over him.
Klein no longer bothered with the problem, and he planned on understanding more about the gathering before deciding whether or not to participate in the future or to warn Leonard Mitchell anonymously. Backland, in a secret room in the basement of the Steam Cathedral. Eikenser took off his hat, pressed down his fluffy but not soft hair, and sat in the first seat on the left. Then he took out the ancient silver mirror of Herodes from an inner custom-made pocket in his clothes and placed it in front of him. To his right, across him, and diagonally across him, were the machinery hive-mind deacons and captains, all of whom had been summoned by the member of the Divine Council, the Archbishop of Backland, Horamic Haydn, for a meeting. The white-robed archbishop looked like an ordinary old man, sitting calmly at the end. Seeing that everyone had arrived, he looked around and softly said,
"Let's start with Eikenser. Tell me in sequence about the investigation over the past few days."
Eikenser Bernard pushed his hair while flipping through the thick document file, and he reported in a concise manner.
Your Grace, we were in charge of Sherlock Moriarty. After a careful investigation, and with the aid of Beyonder means, we confirmed that he was pulled into the matter. Prior to the incident, there was no evidence that he knew of Prince Edesac's problem. He and the dead Talon Dumont were friends, and he indirectly fulfilled some of the tasks entrusted to him by the prince, but there weren't many problems. At most, he had falsely made some fraudulent claims for his expenses.
At this point, Eikenser suddenly felt a little worried because Sherlock Moriarty was also an informant for the machinery hive mind, and his expenses here were likely to be somewhat exaggerated.
In any case, his job as an informant was very effective and very outstanding, enough to offset a lot of problems, and he hasn't become our informant for long. The money involved was mostly just from commissions.
Eikenser exhaled slowly and continued to report,
Our conclusion is that he's considered an innocent party and that there is no hidden plot behind him. He once keenly noticed the danger of Red Rose Manor, but that is a typical example of coming to the correct conclusion from an incorrect deduction. He was afraid of the royal family's internal strife, and for this reason, he had been slow in his work and didn't do any substantial investigations. On this, he had reported it to us. Unfortunately, he still failed to avoid the matter, but he was lucky enough. He mentioned that the descendant of death happened to be monitoring the vicinity of Red Rose Manor at the time. Hence, he was rescued from the perilous situation when the meteorite fell. The signs at the scene are ample proof of how terrifying that strike was. It's likely due to 008.
Klein mentioned the existence of Insa Zangwill and 008 in his letter. As for whether or not he knew the former archbishop and the Grade 0 sealed artifact, no one was concerned about it, because he was with Isaac Eggers for some time. It was entirely possible that he learned the information from him. This was also a conclusion that everyone subconsciously came up with. As for matters regarding Grade 0 and Grade 1 sealed artifacts, the 7 Orthodox churches constantly shared information of the rough situation with each other. The numbers were shared, and there was no repetition.
However, we haven't been able to grasp the entire situation. There are 3 matters that aren't confirmed. First, 2111 indicates that after Sherlock Moriarty fled into the forest, he didn't immediately escape far away. Instead, he stayed on the spot and prayed to someone. Second, it's still unknown when he and Isaac Eggers got to know each other. Third, it's still unknown how he escaped the underground ruins. It's unlikely that he could have done so with his strength. And in this process, he had even destroyed the descent ritual of the Aurora Order.
Ikenser finally concluded. 2111 referred to the magic mirror Arodes. Horamic laughed after he listened to the recount and muttered,
Fraudulent claims of expenses.
He then cleared his throat.
In any case, Sherlock Moriarty is a hero of Backland. If he hadn't stopped the ritual in time, and if he had been frightened at that moment and had chosen to flee, then most of us wouldn't be alive sitting here. Moreover, he has also displayed his faith in God and his friendliness towards us. As long as there isn't too much of a problem with him, then we can pretend that we don't know anything about his tiny flaws and secrets.
Your Grace, this is what we were thinking as well.
Ikenser heaved a sigh of relief and said,
I guess his prayers in the woods, including the ritual of blowing the copper whistle, were to get in touch with Isaac Eggers. But the effects and speed can be different. In such a critical situation, the only thing he could do was to try to save himself, which is something that we deduced from the follow-up process.
Apart from trying to save himself, he could write his will.
Another machinery hive mind deacon quipped before he immediately reported the portion he was responsible for.
We haven't found the underground ruin which Sherlock Moriarty described, even with the help of 2111. We're still temporarily unable to grasp the locations of the royal family's high-sequence beyonders on that very day. It can be confirmed that the Church of Evernight received the information first. This came from a special channel of Earl Hall, but the specific situation is unknown. Most of the forces of the Aurora Order in Backland have been eliminated by us, the Nighthawks, and the mandated Punishers. However, I suspect that they still have some hidden strength. At the time of the incident, Sherlock Moriarty mentioned that Trissy was heading to Backland, but no one has seen her ever since. According to Sherlock Moriarty, she was a key figure and was renamed Trissy Cheek. It cannot be determined what method the Church of Evernight used to capture the Demoness of Despair and the butler, Funkel. Results via divination tell me that they're still alive, but they aren't free.
One by one, the deacons and captains reported on their findings while Horamic half closed his eyes, seemingly deep in thought. After a few seconds of silence, he opened his eyes and slowly said,
Put all efforts into finding Trissy Cheek, if she's still alive. Pass me all the problems where divination has failed to provide any effective revelations. The Church has a saint who is good at this, although it's not necessarily more effective than 2111. As for the surveillance and investigation of the royal family's high-sequence beyonders, it can be tabled. There's no need to worry. They've always known what we've been doing. It's also a form of warning. Continue the search for the underground ruins and report it to the Evernight and Storm churches. Ikenser, ask 2111 how Sherlock Moriarty escaped the ruins, as well as when he got to know Isaac Eggers.
Ikenser looked at the Archbishop, then at his colleagues before gritting his teeth and said,
Yes, Your Grace.
He was sadly convinced that his legends were about to spread from just a few machinery hive minds teams that he was in charge of to all the beyonders of the Church of the God of Steam in Backland. After a very well-rehearsed process, he opened his mouth and said,
Honorable Rhodes, my question is, when did Sherlock Moriarty get to know Isaac Eggers?
The silver mirror, which seemed to have eyes on both sides, suddenly started to glow with an aqueous light, quickly forming a scene. Sherlock Moriarty stood in a room, watching a rat with a rotting belly burrow into a hole, a wall. Behind him was Old Kohler and the owner of a budget hotel.
He got to know Isaac Eggers while completing the bounty mission for him. That mission was issued by MI9, which originated from a coincidental conflict.
Ikenser interpreted the scene. With that, he chose to answer the corresponding question. He held his breath as he waited for Rhodes to give the soul-piercing question. As expected, he saw the bright red words.
Do you know the feeling of trying your best to win the favor of someone, but only to end up being abandoned without any progress?
This question isn't sharp enough. It's unlike Arodi's usual style.
Iconser suddenly felt that the blood on the mirror seemed to lack its usual horror and bloody sense. It appeared somewhat weak. He didn't bother to think about why and immediately opened his mouth to answer.
Yes.
Congratulations, you got it right.
A new line of text appeared on the surface of the silver mirror. Its color was somewhat pale. 5th January, 9 a.m. With a gray scarf around his neck, Klein arrived at Rose Wharf with his suitcase and cane. The white agate was docked there, unusually large compared to the height of a human. It was said to be capable of ferrying hundreds of passengers. It had the rich characteristics of the age, with its chimneys, sails, and its 12 cannons on both sides of the ship, necessary for defending against pirates and other piers. Under Captain Ellen Cagg's arrangement, the chosen stocky sailors and crew lined up at the mouth of the gangway, some even deliberately revealing their legitimate revolvers, rifles, and knives. This gave the passengers on board the boat a greater sense of security. They were no longer afraid of the journey that would take them 9 days to complete. Klein stood below, looked up, and climbed up the hanging ladder in the undulating blue water.
My travels begin.
He took a step forward and sighed silently. Chapter 492. Adventurer. As soon as he stepped onto the deck and before he could enter the cabin, Klein saw a figure moving through the crowd towards him, through the corner of his eye. He looked over his shoulder with an air of indifference but hidden vigilance, and he saw a man in his 30s wearing a black half-top hat and a trench coat of the same color. The other party had a weathered face, looking boorish but extremely masculine. His light blue eyes didn't contain a smile, as if they were immersed in many past events.
He looks a little familiar. Right, he's that guy I first noticed at the ticket office yesterday. He seems to be an adventurer as well. He's actually wearing a trench coat at sea in January. He's quite strong.
While lifting his cane with ease and pointing diagonally downwards, Klein said with a smile,
"Good morning, we meet again."
It was like he was greeting an old friend. The boorish man, however, wasn't surprised. He stopped and nodded in a somewhat reserved manner, saying,
Cleves, a former adventurer. Mate, are you in the same trade?
I thought you knew yesterday. Gairman Sparrow.
Klein responded with a smile. He didn't pass his cane to his left hand because he didn't intend to shake Cleves's hand.
I can tell.
Cleves maintained 2 seconds of silence and said,
Being an adventurer isn't a beautiful profession. I've already switched careers and have become a bodyguard. This time, I'm accompanying my employer's family to the capital of the Rorstad archipelago.
He half-turned and pointed to another spot on the deck. Klein traced where he was pointing and saw nearly 10 people gathered together. They were led by a plump, middle-aged gentleman with ruddy cheeks and spirited eyes. On his double-breasted suit, Klein could see the gold chain from his pocket watch and a jeweled collar brooch. Next to him was a lady in a wide-brimmed hat, her face completely hidden by the dark blue muslin that hung down, and her figure wasn't too bad. Standing in front of the couple were 2 children. The younger one was a boy who wasn't even 10 years old. He was wearing a child's version of a tailcoat. The older one was 15 or 16 years old, and was a lively and energetic teenage girl. Her looks couldn't be considered outstanding, but her pair of brown eyes were quite bright and intelligent. Her faint freckles and puffy dress added to her playfulness. Around them were 3 people carrying suitcases and all sorts of items, a man and 2 women, all dressed as servants. One of the maids had brownish skin, clearly of southern continent heritage. The bodyguards protecting the 7 people were a man and a woman. They were dressed simply and neatly in white shirts, light sweaters, black coats, dark trousers, and sturdy leather boots. The 2 bodyguards deliberately didn't hide the outlines made by the gun holsters by their waists. They didn't relax as they inspected the approaching passers-by. Their eyes were sharp and they were composed.
3 servants and 3 bodyguards?
Klein asked casually.
This is quite an extravagant setup, which means that their employer is a rich person.
Instinctively, he made his judgment.
Yes.
Cleves nodded. Without another word, he quickly turned around and walked towards his employer's family. Klein was stunned. He didn't know why Cleves had specially come to greet him for. After recalling the novels, movies, and television dramas he had seen in his previous life, he gradually understood what Cleves was implying.
He's a little wary of me, or should I say of someone who claims to be an adventurer while not looking like someone to mess with, so he introduced himself in advance to indicate his identity and what his job is. It's to tell me to not have any plans regarding his employer's family. In short, you do what you do, I do what I do, and we stay out of each other's business. Is this the tacit understanding between experienced adventurers and veteran bounty hunters? Interesting.
Klein chuckled. He carried his suitcase and black cane as he went into the cabin. With the help of his ticket, he found his own room. With a creak, he pushed open the wooden door and walked in. Harry Trestrat. The room wasn't very spacious, just large enough to fit a bed, a table, and a cupboard. There weren't even any chairs. Its greatest advantage was that it came with windows. The wharf sunlight shone in, illuminating the table and bedside with pure golden spots.
A member of the crew mentioned that the washroom and bathroom are for public use, with about 8 rooms sharing one. If someone urgently needs one, then they can provide a wooden toilet, but one must pay the cleaning fee of 3 pence each time. I have to be grateful that after the white agate was renovated, it has many metal pipelines laid. Boilers are burning, and hot water is being supplied, providing a relatively convenient way of life. Otherwise, my travels wouldn't be a pleasant one.
Klein silently sighed. He quickly took out his necessities and placed them on the table for daily use. When he was tidying up the place, he sat down on the edge of the bed, which wasn't too high, and he listened to the long whistle of the steam whistle. He felt the power that stemmed from steam and machinery contained within it. When the ship began to set sail, Klein looked out the window at the sea and gradually withdrew his thoughts. He began to think about the most important thing that would happen next, the problem of how to act as a faceless. While facing the true creator's descent ritual and the powerful Mr. A, the decision to give up trying to escape and attempt a sabotage act had allowed his potion to be digested a little. Based on this feedback, he gained some new insights into the acting requirements of a faceless.
You can disguise yourself into anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. This is the principle which Marionettis Rosago was made to remember. I originally imagined that yourself refers to my original identity, but from the looks of it, that's not the complete picture. What is considered as yourself requires serious thought.
Klein leaned forward and bathed in the sunlight as though he was a thinking statue. After a while, he came up with an idea.
Does this correspond to the spirit of one's identity, to their true identity deep down? Even back on Earth, Joe Mingrui had worn a lot of facades, which formed a social persona. In a sense, this was a big part of what wasn't real. Fe tere khatirbo, abula khata khatirbo, woloka hairi, mazi, mazi, mazi hu, mazi, 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 tere khata khatirbo faidendik. Yes, when I become someone else, I take over their identity. In order to not be discovered, I have to disguise myself socially, which is the same as wearing a different mask. When all the masks are taken down, there will be none left. What kind of kashelf does a faceless see at the end of the day? Veracham? Deasказman shalitas. Is this the deeper meaning behind yourself in that principle? When I face my inner thoughts, overcome my fear, and challenge the impossible without reasons stemming from society, am I really acting as myself? This is to be explored and verified.
At this thought, Klein changed his position, trying to sit more comfortably. Remembering everything that had happened before, he found another question regarding acting.
In the underground ruins, I disguised myself as Ince Zangwil and successfully escaped from my predicament, but why didn't I feel any signs of digesting the potion at all? Does this imply that to digest a faceless potion, a superficial disguise such as that isn't enough? Yes, this is closer to the use of beyonder powers and not acting. What can stimulate the digestion of the potion is a disguise on a deeper level. Is it being a true substitute for a person, becoming that person on a social level? Only when his relatives and friends are unable to find him for a long period of time does it prove that his disguise was a success. In that case, the reason why I feel harmony with the faceless potion is because I had previously disguised myself as Klein Moretti. The first principle of faceless is that you can disguise yourself as anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. The second principle is to have a disguise on a deeper level that fools everyone. But to replace a person and become that person in a societal sense is quite evil, just thinking about it. Don't tell me that I have to find those kinds of people who have died in a foreign land, but have a wish that has yet to be fulfilled.
Klein eased his baffling horror, and he drew up an initial direction for his acting attempts.
The higher the sequence, the more difficult it is to act.
He sighed, took out his pocket watch, and checked the time. Since it was still too early for lunch and the room was too small and cramped, he decided to take a walk on the deck and enjoy the scenery amidst the sea breeze. After the excitement of the first hour of the voyage, there weren't many people left on deck. Klein walked along the side of the ship, arriving at a secluded area with large shadows.
It's a warm, sunny day. Other than the strong winds which might steal my hat, there are no shortcomings.
He pressed the half-top hat on his head and leisurely surveyed the cabin, listening to the faint sounds of music coming from inside. Suddenly, he saw the former adventurer, Cleves, busying himself around the corner. In front of him seemed to be a triangular blade, a dagger, and a short knife. Cleves sensed this and raised his head to look at him. Keeping a well-seasoned demeanor, he said in a taciturn manner,
We're all old mates, and we have to maintain them frequently.
At this point, he added,
There are children in the cabin.
Understood.
Klein smiled in response. Cleves lowered his head and continued to busy himself. He casually asked,
You don't seem to have these things with you?
I'm used to using weapons that keep abreast with the times.
Klein said vaguely.
And I frequently do maintenance.
Cleves silently raised his dagger, looked at it against the sunlight, and said to himself,
At sea, guns alone aren't enough. Pirates will board ships, and there will be a lot of people. After you finish shooting your bullets, you won't have the opportunity to reload again. Although these guys no longer keep abreast with the times, they're still useful enough.
Very professional, as expected of a former adventurer.
Klein leaned against the side of the boat and said half-jokingly,
If there really are pirates boarding the ship, I'm more likely to choose not to fight back.
Cleves turned his head and stared at him for a good 3 seconds before retracting his gaze. Then, as he packed up his things, he said in a low voice,
It seems that you don't need me to remind you. You've already understood the rules of the sea. The bounty hunters who travel the earth are often unable to be adventurers at sea.
He skillfully hid the dagger, short knife, and triangular blade under his clothes, which dazzled Klein.
Thank you.
Klein smiled and nodded. Without speaking any further, Cleves turned around and returned to the cabin, leaving behind only his broad and deep back. Klein smirked, shook his head, and turned his gaze to the side of the ship. Blue waves gently rose up and down, and silvery white flying fish occasionally leaped out of the water and soared in the air.
This fish can fly and swim. They're considered the family of the Lord of Storms by fishermen and sailors, so even if they were caught by nets, they're returned to the sea.
Klein was leisurely admiring the surface of the sea under the sunlight, as well as the flying fishes above the surface of the sea. An uncontrollable thought flashed through his mind.
I wonder how good their meat is.
Chapter 493, Hunting.
Honorable Roadies, my second question is, how did Sherlock Moriarty escape from the ruins?
Ikenser's mood was a lot more relaxed than before. The surface of the silver mirror shimmered, rapidly outlining Sherlock Moriarty leaning his back against the wall, his fists clenching and tightening. Then Sir Bernard and the surrounding machinery hive mind deacons and captains saw the private detective's exaggerated smile before turning around and dashing out with his gun drawn. At this moment, under the influence of the composed scene, they all felt an inexplicable sense of sadness and excitement. The image in the mirror jumped, revealing Sherlock Moriarty wielding his revolver as he shot at the altar to no avail. The scene of those disintegrating bullets caused everyone present to be a little worried. Then Sherlock Moriarty threw out a brass key, and the altar showed signs of instability due to corruption. With the erupting air blast, Mr. A fell to the ground, and Sherlock Moriarty pathetically fled out of the temple building. At this point, the image changed to have the slightly turbid Tussock River as the main background. Sherlock Moriarty and Mr. A floated in the water, looking up into the sky where there were no clouds or fog. Almost instantly, Mr. A became transparent and disappeared, leaving only Sherlock Moriarty looking around in astonishment. Sir said with a frown.
The Church of Evernight's reinforcements? Unfortunately, he didn't mention what appeared in his letter. We have no way of guessing. Was he trying to sell this secret for a good price? Or was he simply affected by it and lost the relevant memories? Also, his experience of escaping from the underground ruins doesn't show anything. It seems like the corresponding clues have been concealed at the same time.
He analyzed it quickly, in procedural sentences, and then without too great a psychological burden, he chose to answer with reciprocity instead of taking a risk.
Rhodes doesn't seem to be in the mood to be a prankster today. I can make the most of it.
In his self-consolation, Sir saw bloody words appear on the surface of the mirror. With a skip of his heartbeat, he had a bad premonition, suspecting that Rhodes had already recovered to his usual state. The blood-like words wiggled and quickly formed into a question. Who was the person you gave your all to while trying your best to win the favor of, only to end up being abandoned? With his head buzzing, Sir's face drained of all its color before flushing red. The question pierced a deep wound in him, while leaving him at a loss as to what to do.
If I mention who he is, then his reputation would be ruined before tonight. I've already become a kind of legend in some sense.
Sir swallowed his saliva with great difficulty and bitterly said,
I choose punishment.
A bolt of lightning immediately descended. However, it was different from before. It was no longer silvery white and had been dyed with slight green. It hit him right on the head, causing his hair to stand on end and flash with the color of lightning. He shook violently like shaking dice, as though he had been drugged with a hallucinogenic drug. Archbishop Horrocks sighed, closed his eyes, and muttered to himself.
A Grade 0 sealed artifact?
When Sir recovered, he looked around and said,
There's one more question. Where did the key that Sherlock Moriarty used to destroy the descent ritual come from? Which one of you is going to use 2-111?
All the machinery hive mind deacons and captains looked at each other. For a moment, no one responded. The sound of water splashing against the ship's hold seemed to be the only sound left in the world. The sea at night was both noisy and quiet. Klein suddenly woke up and opened his eyes. He saw the wooden ceiling covered with a crimson moon veil. His spiritual intuition told him that there was something happening outside.
Is someone having a rendezvous?
He tilted his head to listen, vaguely able to hear some unnatural sounds. He sat up, put on his gloves, and put on his coat. His eyes turned dark as he took out a gold coin, flipped it, and quickly performed a divination. After receiving no revelations of danger, he took out the revolver under his pillow and put it in his pocket. After making the appropriate preparations, Klein opened the door and walked out of the room, following the sound to the upper deck. At this moment, at sea, away from the industrial pollution, the crimson moon quietly hung there, mysterious and dreamy. After carefully bypassing a few patrolling crew members, Klein arrived at the area where there was a commotion. He could smell the faint scent of blood. With the help of the moonlight, he looked over and saw the former adventurer Cleves squatting to the side of the ship and setting up something. There were 3 people hiding in the shadows of the cabin about a dozen meters away from this gentleman. One of them was a companion of Cleves, the female bodyguard in the black coat, and the remaining two were the children of their employer, a girl of 14 or 15 years of age and a young gentleman of no more than 10 years of age. The two youngsters wore thick cotton nightgowns and outer coats. It was obvious that they had come out in a hurry. They trembled amidst the chilling night wind, but they still squatted there, full of energy and vigor, looking at Cleves with their bright eyes.
Playing hide and seek?
Klein joked inwardly. He purposely increased the volume of his footsteps, causing Cleves and the others to turn their gaze towards him. Klein recalled the expressions of some bounty hunters he knew in East Borough. He asked,
Friend, what happened?
but he still maintained Gearman Sparrow's unique identity of being cold and sharp. Cleves replied unperturbed,
A private job. A hunt that came by accident, but one that's worth looking forward to.
A hunt?
Klein's interest was suddenly piqued. The reason he had named himself Gearman was that it represented the first hunter of a game he had played in his previous life, and it suited his idea of hunting evil at sea. Klein was in no hurry to inquire about the reason. Using his left hand, which wore creeping hunger, he pointed at the shadow next to him with his left finger.
Private job? Doing a private job in front of your employer?
Cleves, who was squatting there, glanced at the boy and the girl and said, without changing his tone,
Cecile wasn't careful enough and ended up waking Donna and Denton up. She had no choice but to let them follow.
The girl called Donna wrinkled her nose when she heard her name mentioned. She curiously looked up and asked Klein,
Uncle, are you also an adventurer?
Uncle, even if it's the me from Earth, I'm at most 10 years older than you.
Klein said in amusement.
No, you can't use the word also. Strictly speaking, I'm the only adventurer here. They're just bodyguards right now.
He turned to Cleves and said,
Hey, mate, what prey did you discover?
Cleves looked into the faint crimson waters and said,
Murloc.
Murloc? That's a beyonder creature. Even though it's of the lowest grade, it's still quite difficult for ordinary people to deal with them. They would need at least 5 to 6 people and 4 to 5 spears to have a chance. That's right, the scales on a Murloc's body are very hard. Revolvers can only deal a little damage. They need to have a rifle.
Klein raised his eyebrows and asked,
What do you plan on doing, and how are you sure it's a Murloc?
Cleves pointed to the edge of the ship and said,
There are traces of its body's mucus here. 1 to 2 hours ago, it tried to climb onto the ship to attack the passengers, but the deck was still bustling with activity, and there were lots of sailors and crew.
Klein took a few steps forward and saw that there were some traces of green corrosion on the side of the ship. He recalled the information he had come into contact with in Tinjin City, and it coincided with the content in the books. He asked, with great interest,
Why must it be one and not a group?
He remembered that Murlocs had a tendency to live together. Cleves solemnly explained,
If it's a group, then they'll directly destroy the ship's hull and let everyone sink. Moreover, the area around this channel and the surrounding sea have already been cleared of Murlocs. The Church of Storms really enjoy hunting them.
That's because Murlocs are probably one of the main ingredients of the Sequence 9 Sailor Potion.
Klein stroked the revolver in his pocket and asked with a smile.
Are you confident?
Cleves didn't directly answer him and instead opened a paper bag beside him. Inside the bag were some pig organs still stained with blood. This was the source of the smell of blood that Klein noticed. Cleves said as he sprinkled some granules,
All Murlocs like this kind of food and are unable to resist its allure. Of course, these monsters love human organs the most, so in many sea legends, it's emphasized to prepare some pig or beef organs from the ship's kitchen or canned organs. Pepper granules can cause the Murlocs to feel the excitement of smoking marijuana and lose some of their sense of balance. This can last for about a minute, and after that the Murlocs will be exhausted after the high state of excitement has subsided.
He then took out a wooden box from his clothes and placed the dark green paste on the tip of the triangular blade, dagger, and short knife.
The mint cream that's popular in Pritz Harbor is a unique sweetener for humans, but in the eyes of the Murlocs, it's a deadly blood toxin. In addition, I borrowed 2 rifles from the sailors. I got an agreement to not disturb this area for 20 minutes, and I spent a sizable sum of money. However, as long as I can successfully kill a Murloc, then I'll be able to reap 10, 20, or even 30 times the cost.
As expected of an experienced adventurer, he's exceptionally aware about the weaknesses and problems of his prey. Listening to him speak, I feel like they have a chance of successfully hunting the Murloc, even if they aren't Beyonders. In the face of traps and firearms, low-sequence Beyonders really aren't much stronger than the average person. It's not like there are no low-sequence Beyonders who die in gang wars. However, Murlocs are creatures that seem to wear full-body armor. It's not easy to kill them. They would be injured, but it's not like they can't escape.
Klein curiously asked,
You seem to have killed quite a number of Murlocs?
Cleves didn't show the joy of being praised as he remained calm and silent. He said,
Understanding the characteristics of common sea monsters is a prerequisite for an adventurer's survival.
As they conversed, the girl, Donna, and the boy, Denton, squatted in the shadows and listened with relish. They found all of this to be the most interesting thing in the world.
Yes, I also need to brush up on my studies in this area.
Klein smiled and said,
So that's how it is. I didn't disturb you, did I?
Cleves pierced a portion of organs on a rod and said with a deep voice,
If you want to participate, take care of Donna and Denton so that Cecile won't be distracted.
Klein, who wanted to watch from the sidelines, smiled and agreed.
Sure.
Chapter 494, A Bite of Murloc. The red moon hung high in the sky as Klein walked over to Donna and Denton and squatted down beside them. Cecile, the female comrade of Cleves, let out a sigh of relief. She picked up the rifle on the deck, bent down, and quickly walked in another direction. She opened up a distance of about 10 meters from the peppered pig's organs.
Uncle, is it starting?
The mischievous, freckled teenage girl, Donna, suddenly felt a little nervous. However, her face was filled with curiosity and anticipation. Klein raised his left index finger to his mouth, motioning for the 2 young ones to be quiet. At times like this, he couldn't help but thank Roselle. It was because of the efforts of this transmigration senior that some of his habitual gestures had become common body language in the northern continent, so it wouldn't lead to misunderstandings. It was said that in the early part of the 5th epoch, this don't talk gesture was an insult in Lowen. But in certain parts of the southern continent, it means kiss me. Klein's mind was a little distracted for a moment. Donna and Den didn't dare to say anything else. They just squatted there quietly, watching with rapt attention as Cleves prepared for the battle. The former adventurer picked up a rod and threw the thread with some pig organs hanging from it over the side of the ship. With a splash, the bait entered the water. Moo. Calmly dispersing the remaining organs, Cleves wielded his weapon and retreated, step by step, to hide in the shadows opposite Cecile. The 2 of them formed an angle of about 60 degrees to the side of the ship where the rod was being supported. Leaning his triangular blade and other weapons, he raised his rifle and tried to take in the feeling of aiming. The deck had completely quietened down, leaving only the operating sound of the steam engine and the crashing of waves against the ship. As the minutes ticked by, Donna and Denton couldn't help but switch from squatting to sitting, with their backs against the planks of the cabin, trying to soothe the paralysis in their legs. At that moment, they saw the rod on the side of the boat sink a little. The muffled sound of friction rapidly grew closer and closer. Suddenly, a figure jumped onto the deck. It was a monster bathed in crimson moonlight. Its entire body was covered in dark green scales, and there was a green slime flowing around it. It didn't have much in common with humans. It was like a giant fish that had grown 4 strong limbs, and there was obvious webbing in the cracks of its limbs. The Murloc was more than 1.9 meters tall, with round eyes and gills on its cheeks. It looked like demons from legends, making Donna cover her mouth to prevent herself from screaming. At the same time, she covered the mouth of her brother, Denton, as well.
Good thinking.
Klein smiled to himself as he carefully examined the Murloc. Unlike the sailor rampager he had seen before, real Murlocs didn't have human-like brains. They were pure monsters. The Murloc vigilantly scanned the surroundings before squatting down. It picked up the scattered pig organs, quickly stuffed them into its mouth, and produced clear chewing sounds. The light in its mainly white eyes gradually faded, as if it had fallen into a dream.
It's of low intellect.
Klein shook his head and made his judgment. Bang! Cleves pulled the trigger, and a bullet flew out from the rifle. It instantly struck the Murloc's chest, causing its scales to shatter and blood to splatter.
Wah!
The merman let out a cry which sounded like a child, and it threw itself at Cleves, who was hidden in the shadows. It was as fast as a steam train. At this moment, Cecile, who was in another position, opened fire as well. Bang! The bullet from the rifle struck the Murloc's ribs, causing many scales to scatter and the tall figure to stagger. The Murloc, who had eaten the pepper granules, became visibly sluggish. It stopped, unsure of which enemy to attack first. And this gave Cleves and Cecile a chance to calmly reload. They took aim again and pulled their triggers. Bang! Bang! The sprays of blood bloomed in succession. The pain caused the Murloc's eyes to regain its lucidity. It flipped and pounced, dodging the follow-up shots, and closed in on Cleves as if it were unhurt. Cleves methodically put down the rifle in his hand and picked up the triangular blade that was leaning to his side. Instead of dodging, he leaped forward and rolled to the side of the Murloc. The triangular blade in his hand ruthlessly and accurately pierced into the area where the scales on the side of his prey were shattered. The Murloc spun around abruptly, bringing with it a gust of wind. It forcefully threw the triangular blade along with Cleves out, causing the former adventurer to crash onto the deck. The Murloc shook its head, as though sensing an intense discomfort. It didn't attack Cleves and Cecile again, but instead took large strides to the side of the ship in an attempt to jump into the sea. Bang! Cecile's bullet hit it again, creating blood to blossom again, but it still didn't make it become immobile. With 2 steps, the Murloc reached a suitable spot. It bent its knees and prepared to jump up. However, its body was too weak to exert its full strength. The distance it had jumped was obviously not enough, so it could only land on the inner side of the ship. Bang! The Murloc bore the brunt of the damage and tried to flip over the side of the ship. Seeing it almost escaping, Klein took out his revolver. Just then, a loud bang came from another direction. The Murloc's left eye turned into a bloody hole, and one could vaguely see a pale, gelatinous substance squirming inside. It wasn't dead yet. It lay on the floor of the deck, trying its best to crawl and get up again. Nah. After a few seconds, the poison took effect and it twitched to its death. Nah. Klein traced the sound and saw a middle-aged man step out of the shadows on the other side of the cabin. The middle-aged man was wearing a thick dark red coat and white slacks. He was wearing the standard ship-shaped hat of this era. He was holding an iron-colored musket that was a relic of the times as white smoke billowed out of its thick black muzzle. Klein had heard the attendant introduce the man before, and he knew the man. He was the captain of the White Agate, Elend Cag, with obvious wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, his forehead, and the corners of his mouth. Elend walked towards Cleves and said with a smile,
As a captain, I must ensure that no accidents happen. Forgive me for watching by the side all this time.
Cleves had already stood up. He didn't betray his emotions.
This is your ship. According to convention, you have the right to share in the spoils.
Elend turned his head to look at Klein and others and said with a smile,
The next resupply of water and food is in 2 days' time. You'll have to think of a way to preserve the Murloc's corpse. How about this? Sell it to me at a cheaper price. The difference is the reward I deserve.
This is the best solution.
Cleves and Cecile exchanged glances and agreed to Elend's request.
For £130, it's all yours.
The Murloc Beyonder ingredient has a market price of 150 to 200 pounds. Considering the other parts with spirituality, 130 pounds is indeed cheap.
However, this is the only thing Cleves and Cecile can do. This is Ellen's ship, and he had a large group of armed sailors and crew to help him. If the negotiations break down, they could sink everyone here into the sea within minutes. Of course, that's under the premise that I don't involve myself. Yes, it can be seen that Cleves and Cecile aren't Beyonders, at least not Beyonders of the combat and shooting domains. As for Ellen, I find it suspect.
Klein stood up and listened to the deal.
No, you seem to have misunderstood something. I'm not threatening you. 150 pounds? That's a fair price.
Ellen Cagg called for a sailor and gave him the key to the safe.
You are the just Ellen?
Only then did Cecile seem to recall his title on the sea. Ellen laughed and said,
Yes.
At this moment, Donna and Denton, stunned by the intense battle and the living monster, jumped to their feet and ran over to the Murloc in excitement and fear.
Is it really dead?
Donna kicked the Murloc's body with her toe, then she jumped away and hid behind her younger brother as if she were afraid it would revive.
It really is a monster.
Denton took a deep breath and opened his eyes wide.
There are many monsters at sea. Apart from having 4 limbs and being able to stand, Murlocs have no similarities to humans.
Ellen smiled gently. He squatted down and took out a knife, slicing the cheek beneath the Murloc's eye, revealing white, tender skin that was tainted with some red.
The most delicious part of a Murloc's body is suitable for eating it raw.
Ellen carefully sliced a piece of flesh and handed it to Donna.
You remind me of my daughter. Unfortunately, she's grown up and has a family of her own.
I don't dare to eat it.
Donna said, looking at the thin sliver of flesh held at the tip of the knife.
Haha, which one of you wants to try?
Ellen laughed and looked around. After confirming that there were no warnings from his spiritual intuition, Klein nodded.
I'm very curious.
Ellen immediately handed him the knife.
Give it a try. On land, even nobles may not necessarily have a chance to eat it. These Murlocs are fish monsters. They can be understood as a mutated type of fish.
He was trying to dispel the siblings' fears. Klein wanted to ask if there was any wasabi, soy sauce, or any other condiments, but seeing that the other party didn't mention it, he was afraid to appear ignorant. He took the knife, bit into the bloody flesh, and swallowed it. It was a feeling of flesh that instantly melted in his mouth. The taste of blood was very faint, giving it an appropriate salty taste. It perfectly set off the fresh and sweet taste of the meat. Klein chewed twice, taking in the deliciousness of the tenderness and freshness of the fish meat. It was the first time in his life that he was experiencing something like that.
Excellent.
He wasn't stingy with his praises as he gave a thumbs up. Donna watched the whole thing with curiosity, suddenly interested in the flesh on the Murloc's cheek. This overwhelmed her fear and disgust, and she suggested the idea of trying. Ellen fulfilled her request and smiled as he watched her tightly close her eyes as her face scrunched into a grimace as she bit into the meat. Donna's expression gradually relaxed, and she quickly opened her eyes. She excitedly praised.
An indescribable delicacy.
She spurred things into action as Denton, Cecile, and the others shared the little chunk of cheek meat. Eating it satisfied them, but it also made them dissatisfied. They were satisfied with the taste, but were dissatisfied with the quantity. Seeing that Ellen had eaten the last piece, Cleves pointed at the Murloc's body and said,
The meat around the ribs is suitable for frying, while the belly meat should be roasted. The other parts taste bad.
I share your thoughts.
Ellen said with a chuckle.
I'll have the chef prepare it immediately. On such a night, we should enjoy good food and wine together and exchange the legends at sea. It's a very enjoyable matter.
I'm looking forward to it. However, why did a perfectly fine hunt turn into a delicacy exchange?
Klein swallowed his saliva. Chapter 495, Legend of Treasure. Above the deck, there was an extra layer of asbestos beneath the grill to prevent the coal sparks from being blown out by the wind and scorching the surface of the ship. The fat cook, wearing an apron and a tall white hat invented by Roselle, used a fine brush to constantly apply a seasoning created from a secret recipe, basil, fennel, sea salt, pepper, and lemon juice, to the long, white strips of fish, and frequently flipped them over to ensure that both sides were evenly heated. The flesh of the Murloc's belly was fatty, dripping with drops of oil and causing the coal beneath the iron mesh to sizzle and flare up. An enticing aroma began to fill the air, and Klein inhaled again and again. In front of him was a round table and a chair. On top of the table was a unique-looking bottle of wine. The wine was golden red in color and seemed slightly sticky as it swirled about. Noticing Klein's scrutiny, Captain Ellen Cagg introduced in a half-joking manner.
Sonia blood wine is brewed from the sugarwood juice found in the surrounding areas of Golden Spring. It tastes like thin honey mixed with blood. It's sweet and smooth, but it's very easy to get drunk on. If you fancy any lady and want to treat her to a drink, you can consider this. It will make her drink more without realizing it. Haha, that's under the premise that you're able to handle the amount of alcohol she's drinking.
As expected of a former bosun, he's accomplished when it comes to self-deprecation.
Klein sat down and maintained a cold attitude as he asked.
A qualified adventurer wouldn't indulge in alcohol.
Cleves, who was beside him, nodded.
Only when they return home will adventurers allow themselves to drink.
What a pity.
Elland turned to look at Donna and Denton, who were staring curiously at the blood wine. He laughed and said,
This isn't something that underage children should experience.
I've had it before. It tastes really good.
Donna retorted immediately.
It's just that I fell asleep without realizing it and slept an entire afternoon.
I remember that you drank 2 cups that time.
The little gentleman, Denton, said enviously. Ellen didn't satisfy their cravings and instead ordered a cup of sweet iced tea for each of the siblings and casually explained,
There are a lot of Southerners on this ship.
Denton retracted his disappointed gaze and looked at the Murloc, which had its valuable materials taken away. He said rather innocently,
Actually, it's not that scary. It's just a bigger, uglier fish with 4 limbs.
Donna shot a glance at her younger brother.
Congratulations. You finally recognized the essence of it.
She then looked eagerly at Cleves and Elland.
Uncle, are there many of these monsters in the sea?
Murlocs didn't possess beyonder powers which were beyond one's imagination. In the eyes of ordinary people, they were akin to ferocious beasts at sea, or a living example of legendary monsters. Ellen chuckled and said,
No, in the main sea route and the surrounding seas, there are very few monsters like this. They've been cleared out a long time ago. You must be lucky enough to meet a Murloc. Think about it. If I can often kill monsters worth 200 pounds or more, then I certainly wouldn't be the captain of a passenger ship. I'd organize my own hunting boat to chase down these gold pounds.
That makes a lot of sense.
Klein secretly cheered him on. According to his observation, the beyonder ingredient from a Murloc was its bladder. That azure aqueous light made one feel like they were looking at a gem. Cleves raised the black tea which a sailor had just delivered. He first smelled it before taking a sip.
Only by leaving the main sea route and going deep into the ocean, which is often shrouded in fog or storms, will there be a good chance of encountering such monsters, but that would be very dangerous. Apart from scaly Murlocs who can climb, there are also legends at sea of Nagas that have the upper body of a human while their bottom half is that of a snake. They have 6 arms and are very agile.
Elland continued on the topic.
There are also giant octopuses which can spit out juices that can corrode a lot of people, terrifying sea monsters that can flip a boat with a gentle blow, mermaids with intoxicating songs that make one unwilling to leave, blue giant dragons that can produce lightning, giant birds with wings that can cause hurricanes. Heh, I've never seen any of these before. They're all legends of the sea, and no one knows whether they're real or fake.
Mermaids.
Klein's expression didn't change.
Very interesting.
Donna exclaimed, fascinated with a look of longing. Denton looked around, and seeing that Klein hadn't spoken, he curiously asked,
Uncle, you're an adventurer too. Have you seen such monsters before?
Klein was stunned for a moment and then gave a faint smile.
Once. Back then there were 5 of us, and we chanced upon a single Murloc. After an intense fight, we finally finished it.
This was a real experience of his in Tinjin City. It was also his first encounter with an official Beyonder who had lost control. At that time, he and Old Neil had helped to eliminate a mutated sailor at the request of Swain, the old owner of the Evil Dragon Bar. Thinking of this, Klein felt nostalgic and wistful. The cold and sharp expression on his face couldn't help but soften significantly.
5 people?
While asking, Donna secretly counted the number of people who had been involved in the battle. 1, 2, 3. She discovered that only 3 people had taken action to kill the Murloc. Without waiting for Klein's response, Ellen said with a hint of surprise,
A chance encounter?
Yes.
Klein answered frankly.
Were there any casualties?
Ellen pressed. Klein shook his head.
A few minor injuries.
A chance encounter, and you only took 5 people to finish a Murloc. All of you are very powerful.
Cleves gave his own evaluation. His companion, Cecile, nodded to express her astonishment. The battle that had happened just now was brief and quick, and the Murloc seemed easy and vulnerable. But she and Cleves both knew very well that without the pre-prepared bait, the hallucinatory effects of the pepper granules and the subsequent fatigue, the Murloc's fatal weakness of mint cream, and the 2 borrowed rifles, it was impossible to imagine how many people would die in order to kill a Murloc.
Indeed, very powerful.
Ellen looked thoughtfully at Klein.
It was a team formed of 4 sequence 9s and a sequence 8.
Klein said with a half smile and a half sigh.
At that time, I was still very young, and I didn't even have any experience in combat. I was purely support.
Uncle, you're still very young.
Donna nodded her head vigorously.
I like what you said.
Klein keenly noticed that Captain Elland had relaxed a lot from what he had just said. At this moment, several crew members had brought over a large ceramic plate. On top of it were pieces of meat that had been fried to a golden hue. The basil leaves were sprinkled with color, and a captivating fragrance assaulted their noses. Elland raised his glass of Sonia blood wine and offered a toast.
To a beautiful night. May the storm be with us.
To a beautiful night.
To a beautiful night.
Donna and Denton cheered and sipped their sweet iced tea. Klein chose to clink glasses with a cup of black tea. He forked a piece of meat from the Murloc's ribs, finding it firm and without fat. However, after absorbing the vegetable oil, its flaw of being too dry was remedied. As he chewed, it emanated an limitlessly chewy consistency and fragrance.
It's really inferior to the cheek meat, but it's already good enough. It's better than all the fish I've eaten while in Backlund and Pritz Harbor.
Klein praised in satisfaction. Ellen put down the knife and fork in his hands, took a sip of Sonia blood wine, and sighed at the topic.
At sea, the greatest danger doesn't stem from the monsters but those pirates. They helm their ships, going wherever they please. No one can defend against them in advance.
Uncle Captain, will we encounter pirates?
Denton asked with concern as he swallowed the fried fish. Ellen laughed.
The route to the Rorstead archipelago is the safest in the world, with colonial islands en route every 2 to 3 days, allowing us to dock. The route is also patrolled by ships from the Imperial Navy and the Church of Storms. Even if pirates come wandering here, they wouldn't do anything too excessive. After seeing our cannons, they would at most extort some compensation.
Seeing that the 2 underage children had calmed down, Ellen added,
But from the south of the Rorstead archipelago, or as we continue east, we'll have to rely on the Lord's blessing. Many pirates are active in these areas, playing hide-and-seek with the ships of the Navy and Church. If we're lucky, we'll be able to reach the southern continent and every destination very smoothly. But if we aren't lucky, we'll encounter some relatively powerful pirates, including the fleet of the 7 pirate admirals, and even the 4 kings. However, you don't have to be too worried. Ever since Nast became the king of the 5 seas and enacted the rules of sea passage, most pirates will only rob you clean of your wealth, without doing anything too overboard. Around this area, we're most afraid of encountering the captain of the Black Tulip, Admiral Hell Ludwell. He'll get his subordinates to kill everyone on board, throwing the innocents into hell. Next would be Admiral of Blood Senior. He loves blood, and he allows his subordinates to partake in heinous acts. Many girls have suffered under them before being sold to different islands.
Donna trembled as she subconsciously changed the topic.
I heard that there are a lot of treasures at sea.
There are legends of treasures, but most of them are fake.
Ellen glanced at Cleves and said,
There are 6 stories, which are the most famous. Ranked first is the Death's Key. Rumor has it that at the end of the 4th epic, Death, who had caused the Pale Disaster, was attacked by the 7 gods and ended up perishing. He attempted to return to the southern continent and created a raging stormy wave, an impassable barrier. It completely obstructed the sea route between the northern and southern continents. This is the origin legend of the Berserk Sea. However, he eventually failed to return to the southern continent and ended up vanishing in the sea.
When he said this, Ellen sighed with pangs of yearning.
It's said that in some secret place in the Berserk Sea, the treasure left behind by Death is waiting for the person holding the specific key to find it and open it, but no one knows what the key looks like, or where it will appear. Ranked second is the Fountain of Unaging. It's deep in the Sonia Sea. Rumor has it that one of the 4 kings, King of Immortality, Agalido, had drunk the waters of the Fountain of Unaging.